point two, what does Job have that God doesn't have? We talked about consciousness. And Jung called Yahweh's behavior double-faced behavior because he's having this bet with God. And so he says, God has no need of circumspection, for nowhere does he come up against an insuperable obstacle that would force him to hesitate and hence make him reflect on himself. Okay, so this eagle, she doesn't really think about it, she just does it, right? God made me do it, you know, and she would sit there on those eggs until they crawled out from under her dead body. You know, if she froze to death, you know, those babies would be born probably. And
without Job, there wouldn't be God or Yahweh. Yahweh, there wouldn't be Job. I mean, it's sort of like the way I think in astrology of the sun and the moon, and the sun is the pure awareness, pure energy, and the moon is the reflected light, consciousness. And so you've got the two of them, and if there's no reflected light, the sun just dissipates, assuming that it even exists. There's this energy that just goes out.
Sure,
once it's reflected, then the sun knows that there's something there,
right?
And this is there because of the sun, and there's a back and forth that without Job, Yahweh wouldn't be there.
Yeah, so it's like, did you hear this last week on YouTube or Facebook about fast radio bursts? Okay, so in the year 2001, astronomers in Australia recorded a fast radio burst that took place in 1/20th of a second, and it was the equivalent of 100 million suns. It was that powerful, and it lasted for 1/20th of a second, and nobody noticed it. You know, the guy blinked, you know, the guy blinked, or, you know, or he was getting coffee, whatever, but nobody noticed it. And but it was in the data of the observatory. It was in the data. And so in 2007, somebody's going through the data, and all of a sudden they find this thing and they say, "Holy cow!" You know?
So they sure it was an electrical surge.
And they start to look for these things, and lo and behold, since 2001, they've seen 17 of them.
Wow.
Okay, of these.
Trying to communicate with us.
Ooh, I'm scared.
Well, and so they say, okay, it might be a magnetar, it could be intelligent life trying to communicate with us, or it could be a advanced version of propulsion where they just put a ship up in the sky, you know, and then they fire this thing at it, and then it goes at the speed of light across the universe, right? I mean, everybody's speculating what these things are, but there have been 17 of them that they've now noticed. Let's finish with point 2 anyway, of the 9 points. The infantile psyche is in a state of identification with the self, and it is in a state of inflation. It is identified with the deity. Very progressively, if life provides the right lessons through rejections and defeats and experiences of weakness, which is what the Jews experienced, it gradually becomes conscious. Cycle again and again, contest, defeat, lamentation, revelation. Florence Foster Jenkins' problem and the rich kids' problem is that they never get rejected. And so they don't come out of this inflated state. And therefore Yahweh is transformed. It is a real disadvantage to be omnipotent, disadvantage to be immortal. In fact, as far as I can tell, consciousness can only develop in mortal creatures. In other words, the archetypes themselves cannot evolve into full consciousness without being routed through a mortal ego to bring that consciousness into realization. So in paragraphs 580 to 82 now, Yahweh makes Job's life a living hell. His family and friends abandon and torment him. Yahweh displays no compassion. So we're up to paragraph 583. He
True.
pushed a lot of stuff through. I think that that's true. And that's true of Answer to Job. I mean, in Answer to Job, you asked me last week, and let me respond again. Although this was germinating in his mind throughout a 40-year period, he wasn't writing it, okay? He was bothered by it. He was bothered by the story of Job, and maybe from boyhood, because his father had been a pastor. And so he was trying to understand what it meant, right? And it wasn't until he was 76 that all of a sudden it blurted out in one of these psychological...
It's a grain of sand in his shell. I can't imagine having that on your mind
Yeah.
your whole lifetime.
Right, and it's in your unconscious, right?
So it was worked on.
It's cooking.
Okay.
And
He's probably solving different pieces at different times.
Right.
He did a lot of that work on the alchemy,
right.
which had a lot to do with this.
Sure. I mean, he worked on alchemy for 10 years before he wrote a word. And so, I mean, as you said at one point, that you don't know what it is, but something's going on in your own psyche. And, I think that that's fair enough, because that's certainly happening to me right now still. I expect it to happen through my lifetime. And Jung basically said that he didn't write anything unless he was basically forced to by his psyche. It was a time when there weren't a lot of diversions. There wasn't television and that sort of stuff around. And there's no evidence that Emma was a good piano player or anything like that. And so there weren't any of these.
No bridge tournaments at Volleyball.
Or even in Kuznets, right? So, I mean, so he felt, he said of the Red Book period that that was when his life ceased to be his own. Okay, that at that point his life changed from being, just a guy that became a psychiatrist and a father and, the typical bourgeois of Zurich, and it became something else, that required him to write. And that period was the what he calls the Prima Materia from an alchemical point of view, in that he felt obliged to bring out of himself. And so that all of his books after that time, which is a lot, and all of his writings came from that. And I mean, can you imagine? He took a 200-page book, Zarathustra, and he did a 5-year seminar on it that had 89 sessions over 5 years, and the transcript of it is 1,600 pages. What the heck?
Got a lot of energy.
I mean, one of the things that I got recently was another Edinger book, which does the same thing. It does the same cheat sheet for Mysterium Conjunctionis, which is, and there's another one for Aeon, which is before Answer to Job. And so at some point, I think we should, keep going.
Through
And,
those,
one at a time. But I mean, here's the points in Answer to Job where I thought I could write a 500-word essay on whatever was said at that point in the book. I mean, that's what all these points are in these books.